What's going on, everybody? Welcome into the Jack Ramsays, Danny Moran, Brandon Sprague, joined by Sean Highkin, and apparently my whole thing here just got completely jacked up because welcome to technology. So I'm going to edit this one on the fly because that's how this all works. And, well, it's the end of the season, and the best part about this, of course, is that Brandon Sprague is not showing on the screen right now. There we go.
All right,
wow.
There we go. All right, yes.
My fat head was overlapping you. It was doubling it up. There we go. There's Brandon.
Hey.
Yeah, good God. I don't know why I did that all of a sudden. It was working just fine before we went live. All right. So, again, Jack Ramsays is part of the Blue Wire Network. It's the first off-season show of the 2022-2023 season. The Blazers are officially eliminated from playoff contention. 27 wins, 55 losses. Their official third worst winning season in franchise history. Oof.
How many games, Danny, were they away from the worst? Like, where are we at here?
Let me pull it up real quick. I think it was 21 was their worst.
Because you can make an argument they should have tanked earlier, lost those 4 games they won.
They could have gotten there.
And not won any of the games after the All-Star break to at least tie
18.
That, right?
So 71-72, they won 18. 72-73, they won 21. And then 05-06,
okay.
Of course.
So, like, when they were barely a franchise yet.
And then post-Jailblazers. 05-06, they won 21. Which,
again,
again,
a lot of those 05-06 games, they were free tickets.
Yes, they were. and what came out of that? LaMarcus, Greg, and Brandon.
Yeah.
So
right.
if you wanted something to point to, and if you can look at the same thing with the early Blazers teams leading to Bill Walton, Maurice Lucas, and everything else. So who says tanking doesn't do anything? Brendan Wildermo says, so that Canzano report yesterday, which we will get to, but first we have the exit interviews that happened today. Only a few select folks from the Trailblazers were made available, which irritated me a little bit, but they didn't go full Knicks with it, so I guess we'll let it slide, right? I think that's kind of how it goes. Sean, you were there in the room. What was the general feeling, general vibe of being in the room? How did it make you feel, like, compared to press conferences or exit interviews in the past?
I have never seen a team that had the second half of the season go the way that this second half of the season went, with everybody coming in talking as positively and optimistically about the future. The whole focus of it, everybody just sort of hand waved away we lost. We went like, what did they go? Like 2-19 post All-Star break, whatever. Like, everybody just kind of said, yeah, this was a tough season with all the losses, but we're really excited about, we have all these, Joe kind of went through all the trade exceptions that they have, all the different ways they are going to have all the draft picks, and everybody was kind of on message, if you will. It was Joe, Chauncey. The only 2 players that talked were Josh Hart and Anfernee Simons. And I actually, when they said that was going to be the case, they said that a couple of days ago. Mm-hmm. And I actually asked someone in PR why it is that only a couple, because in the past
we've gotten everybody.
You've had everybody. Yeah. Everybody talk, and it would even be like to the point where, this year it would be like, they would probably like bring out, I don't know, Reggie Perry or somebody, one of those like end of bench guys.
Everybody talked in the past.
Like, they'd bring one of those guys out, and then like none of us actually have any questions for him. And so some of us, somebody will like ask him a question just because you feel bad just bringing the kid out there and not having a question. And so we all just kind of going through the motions. I kind of appreciated that they really only kept it to, these are guys that we know are going to be a part of the future going forward. Obviously, Josh Hart is under contract for next year, and he was the centerpiece of the CJ trade. So I think it would be pretty safe to assume that he's part of the plans going forward. And Anfernee Simons is a restricted free agent, but both him and Joe Cronin were basically talking like they both expect that a deal is going to get done pretty quickly and that he's going to be here long term. The two guys, and this is probably pretty obvious, the two guys that I would have liked to see talk are Dame, just because I know he he went on Draymond Green's podcast about a month ago. He did the interview with Chris Haynes a couple weeks ago. If you want to say that those were basically his exit interviews, and everything he said in those interviews is probably everything he would have said here, I can understand that. But we, as like the local media, haven't talked to him since that press conference he did in January, right after he had the surgery. So I would have liked to hear from him directly. And then Nurkic, I think, is obviously the other big one. And, he's an unrestricted free agent. They didn't trade him at the deadline. They shut him down with a month to go in the season, which I was surprised that Clutch allowed that to happen in a contract year, which made me kind of think that they probably have some sort of understanding that there's a number that they have in mind that the Blazers will be willing to do. And I asked Joe about Nurk because a couple of different times he ran through the players that he thinks are going to be part of the core going forward. And the names he said were Dame, Ant, Nas, Justice Winslow, Josh Hart, Nurk. I think that's it.
I think it's where
those were those were the six guys that he named. And a couple of different times, and I actually called him on this. I asked him a couple of different times you've said, hey, Nurk is part of the core, and I know you aren't allowed to talk about specific free agent deals that are happening in the future because you don't want to get fined, whatever. But would you say the expectation is that Nurk is back? And he said that he thinks Nurk, or they plan to continue building around Nurk. And so I would have liked to hear from Nurk about how he thinks this season went, what his thoughts are about the future, all of that.
But I think we also want Nurk up there because we know Nurk would have slipped and said something.
Absolutely. But all of that to say, I was actually okay with them not bringing up every single player because most of them, they kept it to the ones that anybody is really interested in hearing from. I'm sorry, Chris Dunn, really nice guy. I covered him in Chicago. Clearly not going to be on the team next year. There's no reason that they need to bring him in and have him talk to us. I would have liked to hear from Dame and Nurk, but I was fine other than that with Josh and Ant being the only two guys that really were
the two healthy under contract starters or likely rotation players.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, Sean, you mentioned kind of the energy of the team, right? And you mentioned Dame's interview with Draymond, his interview with Chris Haynes. There's I think you used the word excitement. There's an excitement about where they're going. And I think it's a little peculiar given the fact that they won 2 games in the second half of that season. Don't you think that's kind of don't you feel there's an element of the Neil is gone, this really ding dong, the witch is dead, here we go, now we get to refocus this thing kind of energy around this organization with the way they're acting around this stuff?
Certainly. I think that's a pretty big subtext of a lot of that. Maybe not so much with the two players that talked, but because I mean, Josh didn't overlap with Neil at all, and Ant, he's going to get his money, he's going to be fine.
Right.
But both with Joe, and really more so with Chauncey. The way that Chauncey was talking about how it's been to work with Joe and how Joe, and I actually asked him directly. I tried to kind of get at he keeps talking about how Joe is so collaborative and Joe listens to other people's input and Chauncey said that he credits Joe with cleaning up the culture. And so when he said that, I kind of looked at my opening there as to say, hey, so what are some of the differences between working with Joe and working with the previous GM? And he really he went out of his way to be diplomatic and basically say, yeah, Neil was very successful here for a long time.
He didn't hit the bait hard.
No, he didn't. He didn't And the other part that I thought was funny was he said, Neil believed in me. Neil really went to bat for me, which is one way of putting it, certainly. And then the other thing I liked was he said that, Neil, the difference between the two of them is that Neil would just do what he's going to do and everybody else can just sort of deal with it later. Whereas Joe seeks people's input. Now there's the irony of the fact that the reason that Chauncey got the job is because Neil was just going to do whatever he wanted and didn't really care what anybody else thought about it or any objections or backlash or anything. But that's neither here nor there. I think that there was just, and whether you want to put this on Neil or you want to put this on ownership or wherever you want to put it, I think, and I kind of remember going back to my last couple of years covering the Bulls, which was the last couple of years of the Derrick Rose, Joakim Noah, Pau Gasol core, where like there was this sense early on in the season to me of this group, this Dame, CJ, Nurk, whoever the supporting pieces are, that group had just been together for a couple of years too long. And not that it was anybody's fault per se, but when a team like that stays together 1 year too long, it just starts to get stale. And it's like everybody kind of feels like it's maxed out and it's never going to get better from where it is. It's probably only going to get worse. And there was just, I felt like the whole beginning of the season, especially with the cloud of the Neil investigation hanging over them, it felt like that where they thought that just keeping the roster the same and just putting in a different coach was going to solve everything, like it did with the Warriors when they fired Mark Jackson and brought in Steve Kerr. That's like the one time you can point to that and say that that strategy worked. But I guess all of this to say, it does feel between, you know, the front office changes that happened in December and the changes that happened at the trade deadline with both the CJ trade and with the Norm Powell and Robert Covington trades, they're at least trying something different now. And it's not going to be just, well, we have this Dame CJ group. We've kind of seen what the ceiling is, but we're just going to run this back and hope that the results are different. Like, it feels like there's a little bit of everybody feels like there's an opportunity to do something different, whether it's, and we can get into some of the different possibilities here, but whether it's they draft a player with that high lottery pick that they're going to get, or they trade it for somebody, or they, you know, assuming that the New Orleans pick conveys, or they keep that pick, do they trade that pick for somebody? What do they do with the Eric Bledsoe contract that they could have traded at the deadline but didn't? What do they do with some of these trade exceptions? Do they, you know, there's all these different pieces up in the air, but whereas as maybe under the previous regime, there was always kind of this thought of, well, they're locked into Dame, CJ, and Nurk, and so then they're going to shuffle out like maybe a Mo Harkless here, and then a Derrick Jones, and then a Robert Covington, and then a Larry Nance, and we're just going to keep cycling through whatever the next version of that, you know, one supporting guy is that maybe the previous general manager was just convinced is going to be the piece that unlocks this Dame, CJ, Nurk core and makes them a contender. It at least it feels now like, and it's very much on Joe to deliver on all of this now, but from where it stands right now, and especially assuming this New Orleans pick conveys, they at least have a lot of different options. They have a lot of different opportunities where they'll be able to do stuff.
One of the really interesting things I think came out of this press conference we haven't really talked about yet in general, but obviously the idea of moving the pick from the Pelicans, if it conveys, is something that has been widely discussed as it pertains to Jeremy Grant and the Pistons.
I would be shocked if they take a player with that pick.
I would too, but
like I think the idea since the deadline has been that pick and the Bledsoe money, that's going to be Jeremy Grant.
Yeah.
Or Miles Turner, or, you know, just pick role player, you know, high end role player X that is like roughly around that money. Like in my head, I haven't even started looking at like players in the draft that might be available at
from
like
9
10,
on
11 range, because I don't believe that they're going to draft somebody with that pick.
The interesting part of this, though, as much as we've kind of debated that a ton, is that Joe did not mince words when he said we may just as well move our pick if the opportunity presents itself. And when he said that, that was a clear sign to me of, hey, if team A, B, C shits the bed in the playoffs, and all of a sudden there is somebody available, we will not hesitate to move this pick, even if it's a top 4 pick. That to me was a clear sign of like, listen, as much as this opportunity to restock the cupboard, so to speak, is something that the Blazers need to do. If they can find themselves a 24, 25-year-old kind of dude who's a stud, who can come in and contribute right away at the 3 or the 4 spot, they can make something happen. I think that was an interesting thought of, hey, we are quite literally open to all possibilities. He said, we're going to sit down. I'm going to take the next 3 or 4 weeks and really study the film and assess the value of the guys at the top of the draft. And once we know after the lottery, which is 35 days from today, we will adjust and see what kind of happens. Because what happens in the next 35 days? The NBA playoffs. And there will be teams that fall off and so Philadelphia could bite it. Miami could bite it. Toronto, Utah, Denver, I think, has a built-in excuse. Golden State, the Draymond stuff bubbling back up. If they fell on their face, would not surprise me in the least bit.
Well, you know that's what Dame's going to be wanting to go for if that, if that happens. That's who Dame is wanting.
That's his guy.
Well,
a long time now. I think that all of what you said, Dan, is the same way that I read his comments. And I actually asked, I don't have the quote in front of me. I went back through my tweets from the post-trade deadline press conference, but I guess I didn't tweet this quote out, so I just don't have it in front of me. But I actually asked Joe at the time, when it first became clear that the focus of the rest of the season was getting a high lottery pick, what I asked him at the time, back in February, whatever, was, were they playing for this lottery pick in order to draft a player or in order to use that as another thing to move to get, a higher end, guy to put around Dame? And he said at the time that, that they have to be open to the possibilities. I think that's the right way to play it. I think, especially this far out, you don't even know what number pick you have. You have to be open to, different kinds of moves, whether that be drafting a guy. And I think the other thing is that in this draft, and I will readily admit, I'm not a draft guy at all. I watch zero college basketball. I don't have like firsthand opinions about any of these prospects or which guy I think they should take or which guy I think would be the best fit, because I just haven't watched any of these guys enough. But I was just covering the Nike Hoop Summit this past week in Portland, and I was asking different scouts and media members and who do cover, pay more attention to the draft than I do.
They live for this stuff.
Right. The people whose opinions I do trust and take seriously about different draft stuff, I would ask them, let's say Portland gets the number one pick. Who should they take and who would they take, or who do you think would be the best fit around Dame and Nurk and Ant, assuming that's the core? And I didn't really get a consensus. Like, some people said Chet, some people said Paolo, some people said Jabari. Those were the three. I mean, those were the three guys that people said.
Size
like,
matters.
That there's a drop off after like the top three, and then Jaden Ivey at 4, and then like another drop off. But those are the three guys. But there's no Anthony Davis in this draft where like this is clearly the number one pick. There's no Zion Williamson. There's no whatever year you want to say, like Cade Cunningham, whoever, like where you go into the draft and even like a month out, we know who the number one pick is going to be. And so I think even because of that, more than anything, it's not a situation where if you get the number one pick, for a fact that this next guy that you take, whoever you take with the number one pick, is going to be your franchise guy for the next 10 years. You could end up getting the number 1 or 2 or 3 pick, and you could end up with like a high end role player who, one thing I did hear is that all three of these guys seem like they are the types of rookies who would be ready to contribute right away, at least to some degree. There's nobody who you take the number 1 overall and they're going to be like a 3 or 4 year developmental project before they're even ready to play. But I think that because there's no clear number 1 pick, there's no like, this is obviously the guy that you want to build around in the next phase, after, Dame kind of ages out of his prime. Because of that, like you, even more so, you should be open to, let's say, just throwing a name out there. Let's say that something happens to Boston and Jaylen Brown is like, what, this isn't it. Like, let's, you want to have that. You don't want the idea of this pick to be the reason you don't trade for somebody like that, or, a Rudy Gobert, or, just whichever of
whatever
these,
all
like,
NBA player that is out there.
But let me ask both you guys, not to interrupt you, Sean, but let me ask.
No, you'll go.
How many players? I was thinking about this the other day. I don't know what the answer would be. How many players, let's say you fall in the 3-4 range, how many players legitimately, if S goes wrong for said team, are worth trading that pick, knowing that that player may or may not hit, but if he hits, you're still looking at a future that may not involve Dame if he so chooses to go elsewhere. Like, how many players would you say are worth getting out of that range in the draft?
What I would say to that is that whatever decision they make, around whether to keep that pick or trade that pick for somebody else. They're not going to end. Joe kind of made this joke today about how Dame is like helping shape the roster and how he knows all this stuff about trade exceptions. Of course, with Twitter being Twitter, people kind of took that quote seriously and ran with it and took it way more literally than it was intended to be. But whatever decision that they make with that pick, whether to take somebody and develop them or trade it for a more established guy, they're going to do that with Dame's blessing and with Dame's involvement. So, and Joe did say today that they want to win, and they recognize that it's easier to do that with veteran players than with, you know, a 20-year-old who is going to have to get used to the NBA level of competition and kind of the jump up in degree of difficulty from the college level. So I guess all of that is to say that whatever decision they do make, Dame is going to be on board with. I don't see a scenario where Dame is really just like saying, "Oh no, you have to, you got to trade for this guy. That we have this offer on the table for, whoever." Like, let's say Rudy Gobert. I'm just throwing a name out there as like a potentially available guy who's like that level of talent. Like, if Dame were to say, "Oh no, you have to, I really want you to trade for Rudy Gobert," I don't think that Joe Cronin is then going to turn around and say, "Oh no, I'm so in love with Jabari Smith that I'm not going to do that." Like, I think that whatever decision they make, everybody's going to be on board with it. So I wouldn't really approach this from the standpoint of, if they make the wrong move, then Dame is going to ask out in a year, which I think that at this point you kind of have to put assuming that this offseason isn't a complete disaster for them, assuming they, at least on paper, go into the season with a roster that you can say they made upgrades, they brought some guys in, whatever. I don't think the idea of Dame asking out, especially once, now that he kind of won the power struggle with Neil and he's about to get this extension, I don't think that's really something that people should have as a consideration right now. Dan, you can add whatever you want to add on to that, but that's just kind of where I'm at with what Brandon's talking about.
I think I'm probably right in the same boat, to be honest, with how things are going. And I just, when you look at where they're at right now, I think there's more in flux, but there's more opportunity that exists within the organization right now than has existed since probably 2007. I think that's probably the last time that they've had this much flexibility. I joked, obviously, with one of Brandon's coworkers, with Dusty here today on 1080. Like, this is like 2016 and 2017 combined, where in 2016 they had a truckload of cap space, and in 2017 they had a lot of assets. This is the first time they have both, which means they could screw it all up in 1 year.
Well, I don't think they're going to be giving Evan Turner $72 million.
Or Alan Crabb.
Right. By the way, Andrew Nicholson is still on the books.
One more year, baby. One more year. Oh, I'm sorry. Beyond next year. Yeah.
Beyond next year. Yeah. It's through 23-24. I looked it up the other day.
It's the money that just will not go away.
But I think the tough thing for me, guys, is just like, I think we're all operating under the assumption that Joe's interim tag is being removed, and yet here it is not being removed.
Let's hit on that real quick.
So is he even the one really evaluating the proper, channels to be navigating their summer? I just wonder about that.
Sean and I were talking before you hopped in on Zoom, and we were like, kind of where does this sit right now? Because the tone of Joe during the press conference, and from what I have heard behind the scenes for the last 2 months, is that it's basically his job. And I've heard that if somebody else does come in, they will be over the top of him. But like the GM job, the player personnel job is his. That is what has been basically relayed to me. If they brought in like a Mark Eversley to be a president of basketball operations over the top of him and be the lead recruiter, be the face of everything. Here's the thing. I don't know about you guys, but I felt like, especially on some of the comments on the Damian Lillard understanding trade exceptions better than anybody else in the room joke that Joe made, a lot of people overreacted and kind of treated it like a Neil Olshey moment when it was the complete opposite.
You're acting like Neil Olshey would ever say that somebody knows more about something than him.
Granted, entirely true. But at the same time, I felt like because of the tank, because of the strip down, there's still some people that are very little bit of a porcupine about it, a little prickly, just kind of like we're so trained over the last 10 years to be so against everything. Anytime it's remotely off the cuff is said in the press conference because it's been so toxic for so long that people are looking for that. I thought one of the things that it came out of this exit interview, particularly from Joe, and even really from Chauncey, was the amount of just relief and like comfort and like not only the season being over, because clearly that was a stressor, but looking forward, like there was genuine hope. And that I have not had genuine hope for this franchise or felt it emanate from anyone in the franchise in literal years. And I think when you're talking about where that comes from and the way Chauncey talked about it, I think Joe is a massive part of that. And I think that's something that the organization at the top has realized. And I think at this point in time, you can basically, cut the tag off the mattress. I think the GM player personnel stuff is Joe Cronin's, barring a massive, massive change.
Well, I think a big part of that for me is it's the cohesive nature of where they're at versus like before it was Neil and everybody else. And like they weren't going to change what he wanted them to do. Dame probably wanted wholesale big changes years ago, and yet Neil was unwilling to do that. So I think what you've seen is a cohesive work environment between Chauncey, Joe, Dame, like player up to front office, which is not something I think we're accustomed to seeing in the past. And also just bare minimum, this offseason doesn't go exactly how people want it to. You're no worse off than where you were before those trades. They lost in the first round 4 of 5 years. Mm-hmm. You're telling me with a healthy Damian Lillard, Anfernee Simons with another season, and Nurkic healthy, along with some of those other moving parts, you're telling me that team can't get to the first round and lose again? So, it's not ideal to be not improved, but I think what you're seeing is a mixture of actual culture of guys working together and listening to one another, knowing that they can still bare minimum reach where they were prior to all of this thing going down.
That's what I was saying earlier about how this season, whatever the ceiling is, at least it's something different. We know exactly how the Dame CJ Nurk thing would go in the playoffs because we've seen how it's gone for out of the last 5 years. But with this, maybe they top out at being a first or second round exit again, but maybe, I don't know, maybe the Lakers decide to trade Anthony Davis, and for whatever reason, the Blazers are the team with the package that they like them. I don't know. There are possibilities out there. Now to your point about the cohesion, the previous 2 press conferences that they've done, the one in December right after Neil Olshey got fired, and then the one right after the trade deadline, at both of those, there were 3 people up on stage, which were Joe, Chauncey, and Dwayne Hankins, the president of business operations, who succeeded Chris McGowan in that role in November. And I'm surprised that Dwayne actually wasn't a part of the exit interviews today, because the whole point to me of doing that was we want to send this message that the business side and the basketball side are on the same page, whereas under the previous regime, you had the business side who their offices were all at the Rose Garden, kind of in that area. Like that's where their offices were, like the corporate side. And then you had the basketball ops side whose offices are at the facility in Tualatin. And there was basically no overlap and no interaction with anybody between the two sides. And so they had kind of put up this united front. And, you hear, Chauncey talk about how Joe doesn't, Chauncey kind of compared it. I thought this was kind of interesting. And I've actually really enjoyed, one of the things I've really enjoyed over this season covering it is that as little as there was to enjoy in terms of the on-court stuff. One of the things I've enjoyed has been getting to know Chauncey and kind of asking him different basketball philosophy questions and coaching philosophy and that sort of thing. And something Chauncey said today about that I thought was interesting is that he tells his staff, you guys don't work for me, you work with me. And he said that he thinks that Joe has kind of the same approach where instead of, under the previous general manager, it was his show and everybody else either goes along with it or doesn't, but he's the one that makes a final call. Whereas as Joe, I think the sense is, he solicits information or, solicits ideas and solicits feedback from people and doesn't think that he's automatically the smartest guy in the room and is open to suggestions and is open to things that other people would do differently that that he would take into consideration. I think overall it just seems like the organization is in a much healthier place than it was the last time that I was on with you guys, which was after media day, when Neil was talking about how this was the deepest team of the Damian Lillard era. Now, of course, hanging over all of this, and we can get into this as much or as little as you guys want, but the story that Canzano came out with yesterday.
Literally, this is where I was going next. So,
well, I was gonna say that's why Dwayne wasn't there today. That's why Dwayne wasn't there.
To not answer those questions.
Because right, exactly. to not answer those. Exactly, because he would have. I mean, the sales stuff. Nobody even asked Joe about the sales stuff because that's way above his pay grade to determine. But I thought now that you think about it, it was interesting that Dwayne was, after they had spent this whole last 6 months talking about, we really want to show how united everybody is. But we're not going to put Dwayne Hankins out there today because he knew that after that Canzano story, everybody was going to be asking about the sale and all the different stuff. So I have a few thoughts about that whole situation, but I'm interested in what you guys think also.
We haven't really touched on it much. So Brandon, you want to take this one first?
Just the general story of their kind of exploring the sale of the franchise.
Sure. Yeah.
Wherever you want to go with it.
I think talking to guys like you, when we do pods, when we're not doing pods, talking to a couple other media friends, I really wasn't surprised by it. Now, the timing may have been the thing that jumped out the most, that they're already exploring it. But Sean, I saw you had a back and forth on Twitter about, just baking in the sale and the future earnings when you sell that franchise with the expansion fees that come in. Because look, it's no secret anymore. The NBA is going to expand to Seattle and probably Vegas. We know that's happening. They're building a 20,000 seat arena down in Vegas for their own thing. But it was more just so I think the timing. Nothing really surprised me from it. If anything, I just look at it more so from the aspect of where are we looking for the buyers? And I know, Danny, you've thrown out the same name over and over and over again, and it may very well be that person. But I think that's the most interesting part of this whole saga. Because my 2 cents is just like from the fan Portland native standpoint, like she could not be gone faster for me. I think she's an awful owner. I don't think she cares about basketball one iota. She only cares about football. So I just think
even
it's good.
Then,
does she even care about?
No. People in Seattle will tell you that's the one thing that she actually does care about. Now, how involved she is, I don't know, but I know that she actually legitimately is a fan of the Seahawks, whereas I think the Blazers is you've been roped in with your brother.
So it's an inverse relationship from Paul.
Yes, because I've asked about their management structure up there, and people swear by it, like that she's not the greatest owner in the world, but like she's fine. She's not meddling. She cares. She's passionate. She'll do what people are telling her, whereas like here, she has no interest whatsoever. So I just want that to be expedited. I want her to sell the team as quickly as possible because I want an owner that cares about this team again.
Yeah, the interesting thing here that came out of Canzano's article was, and Sean and I have talked about this stuff really going on probably 2 years now. Yeah. As far as like what was for like let's peel the curtain back real quick. Before Paul Allen passed, the way it was explained to me was he was looking to sell, but his disease unfortunately accelerated and they just squashed that plan. And so the franchise has been in this position basically for 4 years, and it's trying to unwind the will, figure out the trust, what happens, who goes where, how does it all work. And when you're talking about literal billions of dollars and all the assets that go along with it, that's not something that just happens overnight. That's something that literally takes a year or two to get through. And then what do you do? Well, then you have COVID. And you're not going to try and sell a franchise in the middle of COVID. I don't think that's.
It's been done.
Yeah,
it's done. The Jazz and the Timberwolves both sold during the pandemic.
And I think both those franchises probably got sold on discounts as well too. And that's the flip side. Is that I think that they want to maximize the value of this. If indeed the sale of the franchise happens in this calendar year, I would be shocked. And so that's why when Canzano said 6 months, I was like, I'm sorry, 6 months? Because everything that I've ever heard about the sale of this team as it pertains to Jody Allen was that it would, again, tie into those expansion fees and be something with the TV rights deal. Now, I've also heard that the TV rights deal is closer than it was in the past, but it's still a ways off as far as like getting an announcement and like getting the windfall from those proceeds. But the flip side of this, and Sean, we can kind of talk about this a little bit, is there is no shortage of people who want to be owners right now. You've got Hansen, you've got Ellison, you've got Fenway, and perhaps even LeBron James. If you look at right now what's going on in England with Chelsea, there's no shortage of American billionaires wanting to buy into Chelsea. When a professional franchise from the big three in the U.S. or one of the international level clubs comes up, i.e. Chelsea, when you're talking about in soccer, is the idea of like, well, who's going to do this? Who's going to do that? It's like, there's never going to be a shortage of those guys right now. In this world, in the world that we live in, that is not going to be the case. For the Blazers, you just want the one with the deepest pockets and the one with the least amount of skeletons in their closet. That's really all you're hoping for.
The way that this is all going to play out legally, I think, is what's going to be interesting, because the way it's been told to me, and Canzano made the point in his column yesterday that the Broncos are kind of in a similar setup, and the Broncos are also looking to sell right now. But the Blazers and the Seahawks technically are not owned by Jody Allen. She is the trustee of the Paul Allen Trust. And I haven't been able to nail down all the details of it. I've heard a few different things, but something that I have heard is that there may or may not be a clause in the trust that says that if a team, if the Blazers and the Seahawks lose money a certain number of years in a row, that they have to be sold. Like, I think there might be some sort of sale clause, like either if they lose money over a certain amount of time, or just period over a certain amount of time after Paul Allen passes away, the team has to be sold. Like, there may be some sort of clause like that in the trust. Now,
which would prohibit them holding on to the team until the full
So
expansion.
But also, when you think about it, like, I know it feels like 2022 just started, and so you hear that 6 to 18 month timeline, and you think that seems insane with the idea of it being in the calendar year. We're in April now. 6 months from now is October. And that's the short end of that timeline. So even if it's 8 months instead of 18 months, then you're into December, January in there. I have heard that expansion more so. I think Vegas is further along than Seattle is as far as like the plans, but the expansion thing might get I think there's some motivation from some owners to get that done, because that's, $2 billion per team, let's say conservatively. It might even be more than that, given that Seattle and Vegas are two pretty major markets. Like, let's say conservatively $2 billion per expansion team as an expansion fee that the new owner would then have to pay into the league. That's $4 billion that the other 30 owners split among themselves 30 ways, that they don't have to split with the players. That doesn't go into BRI.
And the owners of the teams in those regional markets get a larger share, which Jody Allen would factor into both, because they have all of Washington's rights, as well as Las Vegas, who shares rights with Lakers, Clippers, Suns, Jazz, Warriors, Kings, I believe. I think all those teams have some share of Las Vegas. So that's a big pool of money.
And I've had people ask me whether the Blazers would stand in the way of there being a team in Seattle because they have that market share. And I have to remind people that Paul Allen was one of the two owners that voted against the Sonics moving to Oklahoma City.
Yep. It's an inherent rivalry that builds upon your product.
It's better for business. It's better for business to have them there.
Let me tell you also, as a media member who lives here but kind of covers the NBA nationally, having a second team in driving distance for me would not be the worst thing in the world.
You mean having the closest team be Sacramento? Yeah.
But also, let me tell you, as a guy who has a ton of family in the Tacoma, Seattle area, they hate Portland. They don't watch those Blazer games. That's not desirable for them on TV. So that market share is really, is it bigger? Yes. It's not like it's that great of a business windfall for them anyway.
Right. And it's not like a lot of I'm sure there are some, but it's not like everybody when the Sonics left in 2008, I don't think everybody in Seattle was suddenly like, oh, well, I'm going to just become a Blazers fan. Like that wasn't how it worked.
No, they became larger Seahawks fans.
Right. Larger Seahawks fans, or they just became general NBA fans who just rooted against the Thunder or what.
Zombie Sonics.
Like
Zombie Sonics. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. But so that's going to be really interesting to see how all that, and as far as like who ends up buying the Blazers, like I would imagine that Chris Hansen, who was going to buy the Kings and move them to Seattle in 2013, is probably still the guy in Seattle to get the Seattle team. And
unless one of the mega billionaires like Bezos, who has been rumored to want an NFL team, becomes an NBA.
He's waiting on Washington though. He's waiting on DC.
Yeah, I think Snyder's.
Yeah, well, I mean, he already owns like the. I mean, Bezos owns the Washington Post. He has some kind of other business interest in Washington. That, by the way, did you guys see that the Nationals are going to be up for sale?
Oh, I missed that. No,
that just came out today. That it was a Washington Post story that the Nationals ownership group might be looking to sell.
All of the DC properties, save the Wizards.
Bezos.
Yeah, there's going to be Bezos on. Okay.
I was joking with a couple of our other NBA media friends the other day about how Adam Silver's dream owner is probably Elon Musk because of how much he loves to act like he's in charge, like on the forefront of all this tech stuff, and so
clearly shit posting at all times.
Right, exactly. Like they bring back you guys remember from the 90s, like the blimp that would like fly around the Rose Garden, like dropping tickets.
Oh yeah.
So it's a Tesla blimp, but it like, so it has like this electrical fire like accidentally and it burns down the arena. And that's like, it helps like kickstart whatever the negotiations are for like trying to build a new arena, I guess.
Oh, that would be good.
One thing that always comes up when you talk about sale is, are they going to move the team? And let me just say this, because I've seen it in the comments. They are not. Here, let me go ahead and put the single.
We are so insecure. We're so insecure.
They're not going to move the team.
I get it because Portland is so close to Seattle, and this just happened 12 years ago or whatever, or like 14, 15, however many years ago it was, with Oklahoma City. But I also think that the league has seen.
They've learned.
Has seen. I mean, as much as yes, Oklahoma City was a successful market for them when they had Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook and were in the conference finals every year. I think they realized that long-term going from Seattle to Oklahoma City was probably not the move for them. And so with Portland, I know Portland is not as big of a city as Seattle or as prominent of a city as Seattle, but Portland is basically the model of
8th highest in TV ratings this year.
Right.
Even considering everything that happened.
Well, right, but like the in terms of if the NBA wants to point to a franchise that's a small market, like proving that like franchises can be successful in markets that aren't LA or New York or Miami or any of the big markets, like Portland, they have a history. They sell. This year they didn't sell out, but they usually sell out every year when you don't have all this COVID stuff that's complicating that. It's a place that. It's not like a place that free agents are lining up to go to, but there are guys that do like living here. It's not the worst city in the league. Like, I don't think that
you have so many other relocation cities that would be so much more viable than Portland.
Well, right, but the other part of it also is that Nike being here, and the NBA has the apparel deal with Nike, and also so many of their biggest stars are Nike guys. Like, it's in the league's interest to keep an NBA team in Portland, and I don't believe. I know that like there's some stuff up in the air with the lease with the city and the Rose Garden and whatever. I believe that all that is going to get done, and that's not like the idea of them moving. I don't think is really a serious.
The business side of thing, either one of you guys on this one, I constantly get, and I saw some questions or some comments here in the chat earlier, like what the basketball team does versus what the sale means. I have never thought that, gutting the roster the way they did to tank and gather assets had anything to do with selling the team, because the value of this franchise has nothing to do with the players. It has to do with the team itself as a whole. It has to do with the property, it has to do with the venue, it has to do with the market. This team could be the Sacramento Kings and still sell for $2.5 billion.
I would push back just in one area. On
okay.
It's the one thing I disagree with you too, slightly. But go ahead. No, Sean, go ahead first. Maybe me and Sean agree on the same thing.
Just in the one case, I think that having Damian Lillard on the team and having a guy that is one of the probably 10 most famous guys in the league, a guy who's going to sell tickets, a guy that has been here his whole career and has I think that if you're somebody, and I know that like there's been all this talk of, if he signs the extension, he's going to be making $50 million in the age 36, whatever. I think that having a guy like that that is going to sell tickets here locally would actually move the needle on maybe the price or the appealing, how appealing it is to buy the team versus having a completely blank slate. I understand kind of in a vacuum that,
somebody may want to come in and
right. The on-court product doesn't totally, translate to the value of the team. But I think if you want to talk about, you're going to buy a team and you want this team to sell tickets and you want them to get good TV rating, it's more likely that that's going to happen and people are going to stay excited about the team locally with Dame than not with Dame. That's the one area that I would push back on what you had to say there.
I got nothing to offer. It's the exact same thing. I mean, also too, Danny, like we are talking a difference of a few $100 million, which is a big deal. But like, to me, you're more lined up, I think, financially to make just a little bit more if you have Dame hanging out in Portland and they're still contending or making the playoffs or driving people to go to those games or watch those games every night.
I don't like I said, I don't necessarily disagree. I just don't think like I said, grand scheme, it makes that much of a difference. So I've seen a lot of people say that you look at the what the organization has done, and I don't think any of that stuff is pertained to what is happening on the business side of the Blazers as far as the team being sold. And here's the thing, everybody has to remember, these franchises, when they are sold, it just happens. Like everybody talks about like, this group is interested in buying this. Kevin Garnett has tried to buy this, tried to do this. It just, all of a sudden, poof, it's done. Like the transition for the Timberwolves is, I believe, supposed to take place January of next year. I think is when it's all supposed to be tied off and everything's done. But as far as that sale happening, they came in and it was just, it was done.
The Utah one, too. That was like overnight.
Yes. Ryan came in and literally just was poof, gone. And it was like, wait, the Jazz sold? Are you kidding me? Like, again,
the Blazers thing is going to be more complicated because of the trust. And it's not just like somebody owns the team and they can just like decide to sell. And then if the Board of Governors approves, then it's done. Like, there's a lot more legal stuff which is why when John wrote the column about Canzano yesterday, the column about how they're going to start, exploring the auction in the next 6 to 18 months. That just means that there's so much of that stuff that has to get figured out from a legal standpoint. And when it's that much money and that level of assets and portfolio of somebody like Paul Allen,
do you think they have a reserve on their auction?
I don't know. You want to count up the super chats from this YouTube stream? See if you can put something on it. See if you can.
The Jack Ramsey's piggy bank's doing okay.
Oh man,
Jack Ramsey's arena.
Listen,
that's a pretty dope arena name.
That actually is a good name.
I was gonna say we got to put that one out
Jack
there.
Ramsey Way.
Yeah, I mean we got to.
I don't think that piss people off the way it would an insurance company.
Yeah. So, back to the basketball side of things, because that's kind of what's kind of coming up next as far as I guess team building side of this. Was there anything that came out of the exit interviews from Hart or from Ant or from Chauncey or Joe, any of these guys, for either of you where you were like, that's interesting, or that you were just like, oh, okay. Josh Hart saying I've talked to them about my role next year and they want me to be like more of a guard. I was like, that's a lot of shit. Like that was in like a 13-second soundbite. He just basically told you, I was shocked, but now they told me my ass is going to be back here. Also, I'm basically going to be your backup point guard. And I was like, oh, okay, that's a lot in there. But let's kind of peel that back. Was there anything else that you guys got from out of that where you're just like, oh, that's interesting?
Well, Josh saying he's going to be the backup point guard, I think makes a lot of sense because. This is something that going back to before the trade and even before the front office changes, there was, I remember one of the few memorable like pregame press conferences this season was before that game against Toronto that they won in overtime, like before the season went totally sideways, where Chauncey said that they give up size every night with their backcourt. And this is when they were starting Dame, CJ, and Norm. And so I know, Josh Hart is a better defender than, any of those guys are. And so, you can say from that standpoint, it makes sense, but there is still the size issue. And so I would lean more towards the starting lineup, besides Dame and Ant being the two locks and then Nurk at center, I would think that it would probably make more sense if size is kind of a concern there and is something that they want to kind of address that has been an issue, that it would make more sense to have Nasir start at the 3, and then let's say, reading the tea leaves here, let's say Jeremy Grant, just to throw a name out there hypothetically, Jeremy Grant at the 4. I think that's going to make a lot more sense just from a standpoint of not giving up size. And then you can have Josh Hart in different lineups. You can have him play smaller lineups with Dame and Ant where he plays 3. You can have him run the offense as kind of the backup point. Like, there's different stuff you can do there. The thing that I thought was interesting, there's two things I thought were interesting besides that, as far as like from an on-court perspective. One was that Joe a couple of different times when he was talking about the guys that he sees as part of the core going forward, a name that he's mentioned a couple of different times that I don't think any of us have even talked about at all, is Justice Winslow, who I do think that he showed some stuff, especially like on the defensive end. Like, his second game with the Blazers after that trade, he was like picking up LeBron James. Yeah. Like, that's who he was guarding. Like, that's a guy, as far as like depth, a depth piece, like his issue has never, in his career, he's bounced around a few different places. It's never been talent with him.
It's just kind of a budget Jay Crowder situation.
Well, right. But he also just hasn't been able to stay healthy for most of his career. And so as far as, depth pieces and maybe like an 8th or 9th guy who's going to be in the rotation but isn't going to be a starter, you could do a whole lot worse than him. And I think he's under contract for like $5 million for next year. So
I think it's 4. Something
like that.
Yeah, it's a very reasonable contract.
It's a good deal, yeah.
I mean, Joe got crushed for that trade when it happened, but
not such a bad trade.
You get the cap space, you get Winslow, you get Keon Johnson, who started to show some flashes there at the end. Basically, he's
I'm not really factoring Keon Johnson into it.
I'm not talking about
he might pop. Maybe he pops, but like
easy,
I'm not factoring in. I'm not.
Danny's gonna get pissed here.
Be
careful, young guys, young players.
Listen,
you gotta
I'm
be
just
careful
saying,
with Dan.
It is a viable asset for Portland.
Yeah.
Like, he's a young athletic guy who started to show a little bit as the season went on, and like, he's not nothing if you're talking about having an asset in the cupboard.
I think to add to the justice part of that, Sean, like, I think the only reason that didn't grab my attention maybe as much was, and I forgive me for not knowing top of my head, it was either Ben, Mark Medina, or a quick piece. I can't remember which one it was, but he kind of like oozed over Justice a few months ago when a piece came out with him, and he basically said, we are after Justice Winslows. They don't grow on trees. It's hard for us to obtain them. And so when I read that, I think it was like 2 or 3 graphs that he dropped Justice's name, I kind of just viewed it as, yes, injury risk, not been able to stay healthy, but largely a guy that Joe just views that if he's healthy, give us the 6'8" guy all day. And so when he said that today, I don't know, it didn't pop for me because I'd already kind of put that in the back of my mind of Justice was a part, not the most important, not the huge part of the nucleus, but a role guy that he clearly wants here with whatever it is he's building. I do want to say the one thing that stuck out for me, and we kind of already highlighted it, but I just want to emphasize it again. The idea that this guy openly talked about maybe trading their pick. I don't think that's going to get as enough attention as it deserves, because this city and this franchise has long held on to the belief of draft picks and value. That's the minute you talk about selling off a draft pick within the top 5, which is what potentially they're looking at. I mean, you're going to get freak out. You're going to get large amounts of people panicking that you're going to bypass a franchise piece. And I just, as much as we get in the chats and on the Jack Ramsay's community, people that say, oh yeah, I'm super open-minded to this. Man, people weren't open-minded to the tank. They tanked for 2 weeks and they were like, oh, this is awful. How much longer is this going to go on? We're like, well, for another month, because they've solely gone on the tank. So I just think it's a hard market and a hard fan base to really sell on the idea that, hey guys, we're going to trade X pick for X veteran player. It sounds good in theory to some. I think it's a harder sell to a lot of others, especially if it's a player that has 2 years left on a deal and you get the proverbial freak out of, well, the guy's not going to want to stay here long term. Guys, if it means 1 or 2 great years and maybe a championship, you sign me the hell up. So I just love the openness of a general manager in this city on this team actively telling you if something opens up, we're not hesitating with that pick. We are selling that thing off.
The best possible options being on the table. And I think that's
Yes.
as opposed to having your blinders on and being dedicated to the Dame CJ backcourt, the Holy Trinity, and not being able to adjust or make a move. I think that's a pretty big deal. And as far as where the Blazers have been in the past, where they are now, and what they have going forward, if it amounts to more than just lip service, that is a tremendous, tremendous change.
Yeah.
I also think that Blazers fans are used to the past 10 years of constantly being told by the general manager that nobody wants to come to Portland, and they kind of
and now Joe is doing the
internalized that a little.
complete difference.
Basically using that as an excuse to not have to try at his job, and they've kind of internalized that.
Yeah, no,
and so now when you have a GM who coming out and saying, you know, we're going to go
pitch,
after guys.
Yeah,
we're going to try to go after guys. We're going to sell guys on it. Like, not having that defeatist, not having that attitude of, oh, well, you know, we're not LA or Miami, so we're not even going to bother trying to go after the big guns. Like, I keep going back to this, that, and I know he ended up getting traded to the Clippers when the Thunder decided to rebuild, but Paul George got traded to Oklahoma City, and he's decided to re-sign there when he was a free agent. He could have easily gone to the Lakers or, you know, gone wherever, but, you know, he got to Oklahoma City. It wasn't a place that he wanted to go. And when he got there, he was like, you know what? I like it here. They treat me well. They, you know, this is a good team. I like the guys. Like, let's do this. Like, you have to put yourself in the position to, you know, and even if somebody, you know, you trade for like a huge, you know, guy like that, you know, the other example obviously would be you know, what Toronto did, you know, trading for Kawhi Leonard, knowing that he was probably going to leave after a year. You still won a title that 1 year that he was there. They would do that over again, even though he left for nothing.
They take it every single time. And I think every
you have to be willing to take the swings, even if, you know, even if you can't just say, well, you know, we're never gonna try for anything because we don't know if the guy's gonna want to stay there long term, or Portland isn't a free. Like, maybe previous front office executives felt that way, but, you know, that's not really the way to run your organization long term.
Well, and I also think PG is a great example, Sean. I'm glad you brought him up. Like, had they not been blown up by Damian Lillard at the buzzer, had they actually won or advanced and looked like a team that, hey, we run this back, maybe we're the pick. You know, I know he's an LA guy, but there's no given that he's going to just bolt and go to LA. No. Like, this is legacy stuff with these dudes. It matters if you win and if you can create the right environment. I mean, look, we're all.
That also wasn't him forcing his way out. Like, I think when he went to Sam and said, hey, I want to go to LA, and Sam was like, hey, wait, I can get how many draft picks for this? Yeah, for sure. Like, yeah, like, I think that was one where, like, both sides were cool with it. Like, that wasn't him saying, oh, well, I hate Oklahoma City. I want to be in this. Like, he felt like the Indy thing had kind of run its course, but then I wrote something about this a couple weeks ago at BR about how sometimes when these guys kind of force themselves, you know, from team to team, they end up kind of in the position that Russell Westbrook is in right now, where everybody's kind of can't, as soon as that any team gets him, they kind of can't wait to get rid of him because he doesn't have that decade of built-in equity with a fan base. And which is another reason I keep telling people I don't think Dame is going to go anywhere, because I think Dame is smart enough to know that what he has in Portland, as far as, you know, the decade of goodwill that he's built up here, he's never going to have that anywhere else. Even if he goes somewhere else and they win a title, he'll be the guy that he isn't their guy. He's not, like, if he goes and joins some other stars team, like, you saw what happened with the Warriors when Kevin Durant went there. They won 2 titles, but they never loved him there the way that they loved Steph and Clay and Draymond and the guys that were there.
They don't love you like that.
Exactly. Well, and as much as he wants to act like that wasn't a consideration for him leaving, it absolutely was.
Well, and that's also, thank you for naming that organization. We're old enough to have grown up and saw that team was completely, nobody wanted to go to Golden State. That was an afterthought in the NBA. You build something special. I think you could attract people. That's not to say you'll be Golden State, but if you can take a risk and you can win, man, suddenly it's not such a bad place to be.
Phoenix too. Like, that was, that organization has been a, you know, not really relevant. Basically just from, like, basically as soon as, like, they hired Monty, and I mean, this is even before they brought in Chris Paul, but, like, they hired Monty. That was, like, the first start of, like, okay, we're a real organization now. Mm-hmm. And then, in a 6 months, whenever this investigation is over and Bob Iger ends up buying the team, then we're gonna, You laugh. I'm not joking.
No,
No, that's
yeah.
the move.
Yeah.
But like now suddenly, like, when Phoenix has a real owner that isn't Robert Sarver, they're gonna be, now Phoenix might be.
Oh, you mean like a destination city because Phoenix is a kick-ass place to live?
Hell, you know what? Look at Chicago. Like, nobody has, like, the Bulls have never, like, post Jordan, the Bulls have not gotten big. Like, every year they've been going after, like, they went after, like,
they were the
Tracy
Knicks of the
McGrady
Midwest.
in 2000. They went after, like, LeBron, Bosh, Wade, all those guys in 2010. They went after Carmelo Anthony in 2014. They go after these guys. They don't get them. As soon as they go, get rid of, their previous management and coach and bring in a real coach and a real front office, suddenly you've got, Lonzo Ball and DeMar DeRozan saying, hey, I want to go there.
Well, and just as quickly as you think it's not going anywhere, like 3 years before Chris Paul gets to Phoenix and they go to the finals, the owner puts a goat in Ryan McDonough's office to shit all over the floor. Like, it can quickly go from goat shit to actual contending in the NBA.
To goat shit.
I have this memory of, I was covering the first Cavs Warriors finals in 2015. I was in Oakland. And just to sort of get myself in the headspace, do you remember when they, when they were retiring Chris Mullin's number? This was like right after Joe Lacob and Peter Guber bought the team. And like the new owners got booed by the fans when they were retiring Chris Mullin's number. I'm sure you remember like that clip where like Rick Barry then like yells at the crowd. But like around the same time, this was back when Bill Simmons, A, was still writing, and B, when Grantland was still a thing. And Bill, I don't know if you guys remember this column, but Bill wrote this column that was like, from 1970, they win the title in 75, and since then up through 2012 or 13 or whatever year this column was written, he just went through year by year every single like thing that they blew over that time. And it was like every single thing about like, they traded Robert Parrish and Kevin McHale to the Celtics like at the beginning of their careers, and then they go on to be part of the title team and they don't get anything back, or like they lose Chris Webber after 1 year, or like so many different like ways that they screw up different things. And then that column was written like 2 years before that finals, and now you look at what the Warriors are now, and it's like an organization could be a complete joke for a long. I mean, look at what the Clippers. I mean, the Clippers have not won a title, but under Donald Sterling, the Clippers were the biggest joke in the league. Nobody would ever choose to go to the Clippers, and basically starting from like the Chris Paul going there, and then them bringing in Doc, and then when Steve Ballmer bought the team, now they're a legitimate organization that is one of the better run organizations in the league. Toronto is, nobody wants to go live in Canada, but now Toronto is, because, of the way that Masai does things, and, the record of player development, and they have a good coach. They have a coach that guys like play. Like, so many of these teams, and Portland is starting from a better position than a lot of those teams. I mean, yes, Portland has, as a city and as a market, has never been LA or Miami or New York or Golden, or the Bay Area or any of these other markets, but the Blazers as an organization have never been the Clippers or Phoenix. They've always been reasonably well run. They've always been reasonably competitive. They've been in the playoffs much more years than not since Paul Allen bought the team. They're usually like, they had the Jailblazer years. They obviously had this year. They had like that couple of years between, the Brandon Roy years and bringing Dame in, but usually they're competitive. Usually they're in the playoffs. They have fans that sell it out every year. Like, it would be very easy for an ownership group that cares to turn the Blazers, with the built-in advantages of like having Dame there, having this arena, having this, fan base, having this city with this history, and having Nike close by, into one of those destinations the way that like a Phoenix or a Toronto or one of those kinds of.
That came out of the press conference today.
Yeah.
I couldn't hear who was asking the questions because I don't think they gave mics to you guys who were in the room. But I know multiple questions were asked today to both the players and to Chauncey about recruiting players. Like, how is this going to work now? And like that was a concerted effort of like, how are you going to pitch this? And Joe said, I'm going to be in a room with Chauncey and Dame. And then you get Chauncey who says, I'm going to be in a room with Chauncey or with Joe and Dame, and my guys are going to speak on it because when I was a player, you know what I did? I called guys. How is this guy as a coach? How is this guy as a GM? What's it like living there? What's it like being in this organization?
That's
Hart.
why the Knicks haven't been able to get anybody, even though they play in the biggest city and have this legendary arena and have the history and the tradition and all of that. Because, I mean, remember when they traded Porzingis to Dallas and DeAndre Jordan was in the trade, and the thought was that since he's buddies with KD and Kyrie, that he would be, he was kind of there planting the seeds to, get them there in free agency that summer.
Well,
turns out the opposite happened, because he goes to them as like, look, guys, this is a joke. Like, you guys can't come here. And then the three of them ended up going to Brooklyn. I mean, this is something that I've known for, when I used to cover the Bulls, one of the reasons that they were never able to get anybody, despite, Chicago being a huge city with a lot of stuff to do, players talk and players know which organizations treat people well and which ones don't. You look, I mean, Oklahoma City, no player is ever going to choose to go to Oklahoma City as a free agent. But you look at any player who had, Paul, like I said earlier, Paul George chose to stay. And then even in kind of a weird situation, like what happened with Al Horford last year, where they trade for him and then they just shut him down for most of the season.
But they took care of him.
You only ever, you look at what happened with Chris Paul. He goes there for a year. That wasn't where he wanted to go, but he stayed there for a year. They were competitive. They made the playoffs, and then they promised to trade him the next offseason. Yeah. Like if you're a market like Oklahoma City that's not, doesn't have the Miami, LA free agent appeal, you have to do the other stuff right. You talk to any player who's ever been in the Thunder organization, they're only ever going to be talking about how well they were treated and how that organization is good. They have a good coaching staff. They have good player development. Sam Presti is honest with people about where they stand and what they're going to do. You never hear bad stories about oh, this guy screwed me, the way that you maybe did about the previous GM in Portland with some guys. You never hear that about an Oklahoma City. And so when somebody gets you don't hear about Shai Gilgeous-Alexander wanting to go to a bigger market because he's treated well in Oklahoma City.
He's treated like a freaking king, and he should be.
Yeah.
We'll wrap things up here real quick. First of all, thank you all for being here. We've got a ton of people in here the whole show. We'll have probably one of these once a week as we get closer to the draft lottery. Tomorrow we have Jeremy Wu from Sports Illustrated at 3:30. And then we will have the live watch party Wednesday for the Spurs Pelicans, which leads me to where I want to go to next. Spurs Pelicans, Wednesday. Who's going to win this game, boys? Are the Pelicans going to survive and push this?
I don't think I could have less of an interest in watching the San Antonio Spurs play basketball, but since you asked the question,
but you're gonna watch it on Wednesday.
I'm gonna watch it. I think the Pelicans are gonna win this. I think they went 1-3 against the Spurs this year, but that's prior to the CJ trade. I think the Spurs are meh. I'll take the better offense. I'll take the Pelicans winning that one.
I think New Orleans wins this game and loses to whichever of the Clippers or Minnesota. I think both of those teams are better than New Orleans, but I think they beat the Spurs and then they lose the second play-in game and Portland gets the pick.
I think that's kind of where I am. I'm just silently hoping for the Spurs just so we can just kind of a little bit more.
I love it.
Did you see what Josh Hart, one of my favorite things from the Josh Hart.
Oh, his quote today was brilliant.
He was talking about how he knows that because of them needing the pick, he's supposed to root against the Pelicans, but those are his guys, so he doesn't want to. And so he's actually rooting for them to be close and be in games, but end up losing so that his team gets the
The exact quote is, I'll tell you, it's fucking pissing me off. New Orleans in the play-in. Yep. I haven't been to the playoffs, playing none of that shit. So yeah, it kind of pisses me off.
Oh my God.
So listen,
he's great.
Hart was great.
One of the only there's only been two truly memorable games of this regular season. One of them was the Laker game right after the deadline. And the other one was the Josh Hart getting the Barack Obama.
The 44, yeah.
The 44, after which he was immediately shut down for the rest of the season because they're like, no, you can't
keep winning.
You scored way too many points there, Josh.
And by the way, on the Barack Obama point, I tweeted out that quote when he said it after the game, and my buddy Sopan Deb, who covers the NBA for the New York Times, replied to me and said that his career average is the John Tyler, which I thought was pretty good.
What is it? Is Tyler
10?
10? I was just saying it's 11. Okay.
All right.
Yeah, somewhere in there. I don't have the order of the presidents.
Yeah, I listen. I did when I was a kid, but not anymore. Again, thank you all. We appreciate you. Like, rate, review, subscribe. If you haven't already subscribed to the show, help us grow the show. We hit 3,000 before we got done with the season, which was always our goal. Things, unfortunately, went a lot more sideways than we thought, but we have a ton coming up for the offseason. Like I said, we've got Jeremy Woo tomorrow at 3:30.
That's my guy. I like Jeremy.
Listen, we are pro Jeremy Woo here. We're going to hit on all things NBA draft, and we will have more draft coverage. We have Ricky O'Donnell from SB Nation, who I'm trying
Also
to
my
nail down
guy.
time with. Listen, man, I know who to go to. Mr. Chicago, who I'm sure will be at the Combine as well.
Oh, yeah.
Because he is a NBA draft guy and he's a Chicago guy. So, and then again, of course, we have the NBA draft combine coming up, which we will have a little bit more information. And I would imagine that Joe Cronin will also be there as well, because they don't have the playoffs and to deal with other stuff. So
Maybe
again,
even as the lottery rep.
that was the thing. The question was asked and there was no answer. And I was like,
Yeah,
because we talked about this the other day, and we were like with Holdall, and we're like, Dame would be the guy, I think, but I think Dame might be out of the country at that point in time.
Yeah, I don't know what the move is there, because I think the real feel good, I don't think it would happen because I think he's probably too old to get on a plane. But when you saw the reception that Bill got last night,
yeah,
that would be the move. I don't think
that's pro basketball karma right there. The basketball gods couldn't shun that.
What about Walton? Would it surprise you if they went Walton?
Would he do it? Would he do it?
Is the relationship repaired enough for him to do it?
Is he getting attention?
That's the
Is
part
he getting attention? He might do it.
This is true.
I think Chauncey is a bad idea because I still think that there's a portion of the fan base that is turned off by the way. I mean, anything that brings up the previous general manager's influence, I think is a bad idea.
I think Ant might end up being the guy.
That would not be the worst idea in the world.
Because
people have brought up Brandon Roy as an idea, but I don't.
That relationship's got to be a lot more repaired before that happens.
Well, no, it's not even the relationship. I think it's more some of the things that you're required to do in order to get into a lot of these NBA rooms that he maybe has not done, if you will.
Yes, that's another part of it. Bleak says send Sheed, also another person who would have trouble getting into those rooms.
Pick don't lie. Pick don't lie.
But again, Sean, anything you got coming up for Bleach Report?
Not really anything in
it's
particular.
It's the off season.
Just playoff cover. I'm going to be kind of jumping onto other, covering kind of more
relevant teams,
NBA stuff. So playing, I'm going to Chicago in a month for the combine and the lottery, and I'm assuming the Bucks are probably still going to be in the playoffs by then. So maybe while I'm out there, I'll get out to Milwaukee for one of those games if they're in the conference finals or something. But just, I'm around. I'm on Twitter. You know where to find me.
Perfect. And here's I'm going to do another plug for somebody else here, since you said Milwaukee. For anybody interested, Mir and Fader's book is now available on paperback. If you haven't already got
the
book.
paperback.
Yeah. So in case anybody hasn't already got it, it is the best Giannis book that you will ever read. Nobody will write better.
Get the audiobook too.
Is there an audiobook?
Does she do the audio?
There's an audiobook that she actually she hired a Greek teacher to make sure she got Miran's a friend, so she's told me about all this stuff, but she hired a Greek teacher or a Greek
linguist
tutor or something to make sure she got all the pronunciations and stuff right.
Oh, that's
So
good.
she really went all out for the audiobook. So that's what I would tell people.
That's awesome. Well, we'll get out of here on that. Again, thank you, Sean, for joining us. Again, folks, like, rate, review, subscribe. Help us grow the show. If you're watching here on YouTube Live, please subscribe. If you haven't already, if you're watching on the replay, please subscribe. And remember, you can get us wherever you get your podcasts. We will be back tomorrow afternoon at 3:30 with Jeremy Woo of Sports Illustrated to talk on all things NBA draft. And then on Wednesday, we will have the watch party for all the members for the Pelicans Spurs game. Other than that, Sean, thank you. Appreciate you. For Brandon, I am Danny. We'll catch you guys tomorrow. Have a